talking about another process, also using another tool, which is always fine. But the environmental review. So environmental reviews, we walked through kind of who reviews CNAs, the timing of all that. But what we wanted to do now is kind of walk through environmental reviews and all the Part 50 reviews. So remembering earlier in the day, we talked about a PVD-RAD conversion. So it's not just PVD-RAD conversions, it's PVVs in general. So PVVs, new PVVs, moving PVVs require a Part 58 review. Anything that has PVRA in it requires a Part 50. Sometimes, if the transaction is using PVVs and some things align and the responsible entity can't do it, won't do it, this sort of thing, then a Part 50 can be done in lieu of a Part 58. But the reverse is never true. Okay? So you can't ever have a Part 58 done instead of a Part 50. So if HUD's involved, there's a Part 50. If HUD is asked to be involved, there's a Part 50. Okay, so just kind of setting the stage there. So luckily today we have two experts, and I am not one. So we've got Ladrina and Kara that will be presenting remotely today. Ladrina from Chicago, or maybe Indiana, depending on where she is at the moment, home or at the office. And then Kara, who's home because that's just the way 2024 is playing out for her, sadly. So we wish that she was here with us.
Worst year ever.
Apparently off to a bad start. So anyway, and then I will be here on site to MC or jump in based on what we need to see going on. So I'm now going to hand it over to, I don't know, who decided they were starting? Ladrina, you starting?
I'm going to start, Robert. Thanks so much for the intro, and hi, everyone. You've been through quite a day of one-on-one training, and I just hope you save some of your capacity for the final one. We've got a jam-packed agenda to burn through within 45 minutes or so. So we're going to keep this as broad as possible, while also making sure you have a good baseline for a more intensive training in the future. So what's on deck here? We're going to start off with talking about what an environmental review is, why it's important. We're going to run through the regulation governing the review process, including who does what and when. We're going to discuss the HEROES platform, where we look at these reviews and learn how to navigate it. We'll touch on the related laws and authorities that need to be addressed. We'll show how an environmental assessment looks and what's required. We'll look at acceptable mitigation measures, and finally wrap up with some of the common quirks in the process and how we navigate them. Okay, so by a show of hands, how many folks in the room have actually done an environmental review?
Wow.
Oh, nice. Oh, this is great. We have
Pretty
other
good.
good people to ping on, for sure. So, all right. So let's get started with the basics. You know, what's an environmental review? So an ER, as we refer to it as, is the process of reviewing a HUD-assisted project and its potential environmental impact. Why is this important? It's there to ensure that the project doesn't negatively impact the surrounding environment or have an adverse effect on residents' health and safety. Okay. Now it's important to know that an ER must be performed before any funds, regardless of the source, are committed to a project. And this is something that you might have heard before, known as one of the choice limiting actions. All right. And another important note is that an ER is required for all RAD conversions, regardless of whether any repairs are being performed at the conversion. We'll go into more detail into that a little bit later. Okay. All right. So two things that the environmental review procedures depend on: the transaction type and the level of review that's required. The type of transaction will dictate who will perform the environmental review. So that'll either be HUD or the responsible entity, okay? And as you can see in the footnote, the responsible entity is the unit of local government in which the project is located and has some level of land use responsibility, unless that entity cannot feasibly act as a responsible entity, excuse me, which we'll also get into later. But this could be, you know, the responsible entity could be, you know, the state, the county, the city. It could be Indian tribes, etc. But the responsible entity is a unit of local government that takes on that legal responsibility of that review. And then the level of review dictates what documentation needs to be submitted to the entity performing the ER. Okay. Transaction types. So under RAD, we know there are two Section 8 conversion options. We have PBRA and PBV. PBRA will be reviewed under Part 50 of the Code of Federal Regulations, all right? And that's what we refer to as Part 50 reviews. In PBRA instances, as mentioned previously, HUD, which is the RAD TM or Grant Loan Specialist, will be the environmental review preparer. Project-based vouchers will be reviewed under Part 58, okay? And like we said before, the responsible entity will be the ER preparer in that instance. All right, so for the transaction types, here's a handy chart whenever there's a doubt of who's responsible for reviewing the environmental review. We have on the left-hand column a description of the project. You'll notice that all PBRAs, as mentioned, are governed under Part 50 reviews, okay? When it comes to non-FHA PBRA conversions, the reviewer will be the RAD TM. When it's a FHA PBRA non-risk share conversion, the reviewer will go over to the production staff, the underwriting staff, and on the production team. And when it's PBRA FHA risk share, it goes back to the RAD TM as the reviewer. Down at the bottom, you'll see one instance where the PBV project is in the Part 50 realm, and that's when it's a PBV FHA insured non-risk share project that falls under the production purview. Other than that,
let me jump in just for.
Oh, go ahead.
Latrine, let me jump in just for a second. Yeah. So just for the grant loan specialists, you all will be doing the Part 50 reviews, except when it comes into the FHA, right? Just like the CNA review. Any FHA deal comes in, production's going to own those. Okay. So I know we've had some cross pollination in these elements deals and some some updates and some that sort of thing. We're going to continue working through that. But we're trying hard to make sure that production owns the FHA ones when they come through. Okay, so more than likely for leading edge and comprehensive that are not using FHA, you guys are going to be doing the Part 50s on all of those. Okay, these elements ones that we're rolling through, we're kind of bouncing around, figuring out who's responsible for all those pieces. And you all don't need to worry about that right now because again, you don't have access, you don't know how to do them. But at the end of the day, you all will be doing them, and you'll be doing them in euros. Okay. Yes, Roger.
Also, the FHA deals, for example, Part 50, just ensure that it includes the scope of work, the GR scope of work, and includes the source of funding. So at the beginning, it has to list GR funded grant or loan. Then it has to capture the scope of work within the GR.
Yeah, that's what we need to be making sure we're checking for elements for sure, and then the few leading edge ones that are trying to kind of skirt their way in early, we'll be watching those closely. But if you have questions, and you're doing this now, you can all reach out to us. I know Carolyn's got some that she's been working on. But don't get hung up on these and be confused by what's going on. Okay, we've got a team in place to take care of them, and you all will eventually be taking them all over, which will be fun. So, yeah. Sorry, Ladrina, I just want to jump in on that one.
No, I definitely appreciate that. And I should have mentioned too, that caveat, with the Part 58s, as Robert mentioned before, the GLS, you won't be seeing those. I think we had an instance where we did see one previously, but we know that, you are, Part 50s are your realm. Like that's what you should be seeing on a regular basis. Okay. All right. Okay, next slide. So level of review. So there are 3 potential levels of environmental reviews for RAD. You have the CES reviews, which is full of acronyms, right? So we have assess, which stands for categorical exclusion subject to the federal laws and authorities, which is cited in the Code of Federal Regulations, Part 50 and Part 58. We have EA reviews, which are environmental assessments, and then we also have EIS reviews, which are pretty rare, but they stand for environmental impact statements. It's important to note that a RAD transaction can never be initially exempt from an environmental review. As I mentioned earlier, all RAD transactions require an environmental review. We're talking about, a conversion of assistance, which is a federal action, and therefore all these transactions will require an environmental review. Okay, so that means that, RAD transactions are never eligible for a CENST review or a SENS review, which is categorically excluded, not subject to the related laws and authorities. So if you ever see a SENS, you can just know right away off the bat that this review is incorrect.
Yeah, Ladrina, this is Robert again. So for the GRP side, I think the same rules apply, but I didn't change this slide because I wasn't 100% sure. I think it's highly unlikely that there'll be any that come in that are CENST, so not subject to. I think they're all going to require some form of environmental review. Maybe EAs as well. So yeah,
you're right.
Okay. Thanks, Ladrina.
Yep. Okay, so talking more about the sets, because we tend to see a lot of these, or more often than not, our projects are sets. But the lowest possible initial review of a RAD transaction is assessed, okay? And a phase 1 environmental site assessment or a transaction screen, which is, basically a phase 1 light, is required to be submitted for all assessed reviews. And these 3 boxes indicate what type of project will qualify as assessed. And HEROES does a great is a great way to kind of navigate, what project requires these 3 things. So the 3 requirements are: the unit density is not changed more than 20%. The project does not involve changes in land use from non-residential to residential, and the estimated cost of rehab is less than 75% of the total estimated cost of replacement after rehab. So if your project qualifies on any one of these or for any one of these, it's likely that it is assessed and they can continue with the Part 50. All right. So the environmental assessment level review. So the EA is prepared under NEPA, which is the National Environmental Policy Act. It is generally required when a project has activities such as new construction, a change in the land use, so like we talked about in a previous screen, and some instances where there's a substantial rehab that triggers an environmental assessment. So the EA thoroughly investigates the impact of the project on the surrounding environment, the community, and population, and the impacts of surrounding conditions on the project. And these assessments must consider a broader range of potential risks and impacts and conclude with the finding of whether the project will have a significant impact on the human environment, or in other words, on HEROES, it's called a FONSI, finding of no significant impact. That's what you would look for as a conclusion for the environmental assessment. So here's a handy dandy chart. We love charts. Starting with the type of transaction. Is it PBRA versus PVV? You can go down then and ultimately say this is the environmental review preparer, the TM versus the responsible entity. And then going down, you can determine the level of review. Will it be assessed or an environmental assessment? Okay, so with Part 58 reviews, I will highlight again, this as a grant loan specialist, you will not see these. These are more so for the RAD side of things. The legal responsibility for Part 58 reviews are taken on by the responsible entity. The PHA and the PIH field office are also involved. As a transaction manager, you have very a very limited role in reviewing a Part 58. Gotta stress that pretty hard here. With Part 58 or those PBV transactions, the financing plan has to include the following to satisfy HUD environmental clearance. The Form 70, 15, 16, okay? That's where the RE determines that the project can't convert to exempt. They have to upload this form called the Authority to Use Grant Funds and documentation of the public notice. Now that form is signed usually, or at least I've seen, by the director of the PAH field office, okay? They are the ones that are granting the authority to use grant funds in these conversions. The other thing that can be uploaded would be a letter of finding of exempt activity from the responsible entity. Now, if the RE determines that the project converts to exempt, there isn't a requirement for a request to release the funds, okay, or public notice. Instead, the RE is going to prepare a letter documenting their finding that the review has converted to exempt. So we talked about on the previous slide that a Part 58 can't convert to that it can never be outright exempt by using a cent for RAD, but it can eventually convert to exempt. It just can't be initially outright exempt via a CNENST. Okay. When reviewing the RAD PBV transaction that requires that form, here are 3 things that the TM must do. You have to confirm that it's signed by the appropriate HUD field office. Compare the description of the project on that authority to use grant funds with the RAD project description to ensure that they are consistent, and then notify the field office and REO or the regional environmental officer that if there are any discrepancies and issues found with the information in that form. Now, this is important because I've seen before where the description has changed, and sometimes that can change the level of review. So, and change the level of the laws and authorities that can be triggered, okay? So it's really important when you get that 70, 15, 16, and you're looking at the project description, make sure it matches the conversion overview or what you know about the rehab of the project, because it can change either the level of review and possibly different laws that can be triggered, okay? And I'm specifically thinking about, ground disturbance, where you have to, contact, the tribes and things like that. Like the project description is definitely important when you're going through these environmental reviews. And then when you're reviewing PBV transactions that convert to exempt, 3 things to do: confirm that the finding of exempt activity is executed properly by the responsible entity. Again, compare the description of the project and activities in the finding with the description and activities in the RAD application. And then notify the field office or the regional or field environmental officer if there are any discrepancy or issues found in the information represented in the Part 58. And for Part 58, new requirements: owners have to submit a radon report consistent with the requirements of the MAP guide for HUD to review. And this is all PBV transactions, okay? And they should do this at the time of RAD concept call or the conversion plan, unless it's new construction, when in those cases, having a radon inspection isn't feasible. The report should include results of any testing performed, details of any mitigation that's necessary, and then the timing of that mitigation. And you, as a transaction manager, will include any necessary radon special conditions or additional provisions to the RAD conversion commitment. Ooh, okay. We're going to the Part 50. Okay, so Part 50 under everyone's purview. the Part 50 review follows the guidelines and requirements of Chapter 9 of the MAP Guide, which is great to have a kind of like a first source that's, what's required, what we're supposed to be looking at. All applicable supporting documents should be uploaded to the resource desk, and partners should submit their findings directly into HEROES prior to the RAD concept call. A copy of the downloaded HEROES submission should be submitted with the finance plan, and the transaction manager or grant loan specialist will evaluate the ER and HEROES to make the final determinations. So since you are making the final determinations, you retain the right to ask the awardee for additional information, especially if the environmental reports don't fully address the requirements of Part 50. And as a side note, the regional environmental officer must review and comment on the environmental review if the project has more than 200 units and requires an environmental assessment. So your environmental clearance in those instances is not complete until the regional environmental officer has certified on that review.
And that happens very, very rarely.
Oh, yeah.
Like once. So don't worry about that.
And then, Part 50 tier reviews. Okay, so when you have PBRA conversions that don't have FHA insurance, and they say that we're just going to do repairs, or just maintenance, we don't foresee any repairs or other physical activities beyond what we consider maintenance. We have allowed a broad level tiered review be conducted, where HUD has made a program-wide compliance determination for most of the applicable laws and authorities. So HUD, in these instances, HUD will only complete a site-specific compliance review of these authorities, and that's Historic Preservation, Coastal Barrier Resources Act, flood insurance and floodplain management, as well as the radon. So in these instances, a complete Part 50 will not be completed through HEROES. However, the applicant will be required to complete a separate form that's fillable, where they indicate how they meet these requirements, how they comply with each one of these authorities. They're required to attach documentation, and then we as HUD will upload this information to a HEROES entry that has already been created for tier reviews as our environmental record.
And GRP transactions are not eligible for tiered review. Not.
Right. Okay.
Great. Awesome. Thanks, Adriana.
Mm-hmm.
That was amazing. All right. So we're going to jump into next to talk about what this thing you keep hearing us talk about, HEROES, is. HEROES is the HUD Environmental Review online system. And it was developed by the Office of Environment and Energy, OEE. And it's the online system that was developed to document and manage all Part 50 environmental reviews throughout HUD. And it covers all level of environmental reviews. It mostly covers Part 58. It does cover Part 50. It does also cover Part 58 projects, but it is not required to be completed in HEROES for Part 58. So we don't really pay attention to that. We're really focused on Part 50s being completed in HEROES. And the great thing about HEROES is that it includes on-screen guidance for completing all of the environmental reviews. It's a really intuitive question and answer based system. And in revision 4 of the RAD notice, it was made mandatory that all Part 50s be completed in HEROES. And everything is directly inputted by the consultants, PHAs, or other partners. So when a transaction manager or a GLS is going to be getting a Part 50 assigned to them, you will see it basically completed for you. And it's being completed by those that are, the environmental experts. And like I said, Part 58s can be done, but they're not required. And so it requires HEROES to be accessible to the environmental partners. We call them partners. So that's usually the environmental consultants, lenders in the case of FHA, PHAs on a very limited basis, and as well as all of us HUD staff. I will say, if you are a new HUD employee and you don't have HEROES access yet, it does require a submission to be made by your supervisor. So just flag it for your supervisor. They can put that request in for you.
So Kara,
Next slide.
So Kara, we've started that process for all of the grant loan
Great.
specialists. So
Perfect.
that's underway.
Lovely. So using HEROES. So just sort of a quick overview of what that process looks like. So that partner that we were just talking about, they're going to complete the Part 50 in HEROES, and they're going to assign that review to you, the transaction manager. At this stage, the partner is going to make an initial determination on the level of review. So they're going to be like, this project is, pretty basic. I'm pretty comfortable saying that this is going to be assessed review. Or they may be like, all right, I know this is new construction. This is going to be an environmental assessment. We're going to submit it that way. So they make that initial determination. The TM will complete a cursory review for the concept call. So the Part 50 needs to be assigned to the transaction manager by the time of the concept call. And the big thing for this is because we want to be able to confirm the level of review is correct. So, be able to get out ahead of it if it really should be an EA, and they've only done assessed because it requires a lot more information. It allows you to go through and make sure that there isn't anything missing. Again, trying to get ahead of the timeline. And at this point, it's the point at which the transaction manager will have to submit their packages to the State Historic Preservation Office and the Tribal Historic Preservation Offices. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. And then when the financing plan is actually submitted, the TM will complete the full Part 50 review, and that'll all be done into HEROES. And when the transaction manager is done with their review, they'll pass it along to their branch chief, and that's their certifying official, and they will ultimately sign off on it for the RAD program, and that will be the conclusion of the environmental review and that you have environmental clearance.
Right, and then Kara, so for GRRP, the grant loan specialist will get these at the transaction plan submission stage, and that's where it'll pick up for them. So there won't be any kind of early look. There won't be any early look because there'll be no way to have an early look because they don't know what they're doing at the site until they have their transaction plan put together. So that's going to be fairly true for both comprehensive and leading edge. Although comprehensive, I could make the argument that once the scope of work is agreed upon, then the HEROES could start at that point in time. But we'll kind of figure that out as we go. But I think that's the stage where the GRP grant loan specialist will take on. So, okay.
All right. So using HEROES. So the partner submission, like I said, when it gets assigned to you, it's going to be pretty much entirely filled out for you, which is lovely. They're going to respond to a series of questions to determine whether the project complies with the specific law and authority, if any mitigation needs to be done. And a compliance determination is automatically generated. But, the partner, you'll notice as you start to go through a bunch of these, you'll notice that they'll add additional information to help explain things that are confusing or not clear. But there are several things that a partner cannot do in HEROES, and it is actually the responsibility of the transaction manager or HUD in general to do. So a partner cannot make initial contact to the tribes or under a Section 106 consultation. Same thing with SHPO. They cannot initiate consultation with SHPO. They cannot start a Section 7, which is endangered species. They can't start a Section 7 consultation, and they cannot finalize any 8-step process under Part 55, which is the floodplain management. So these are really important to note because it does require the transaction manager or the GLS to to be a little more involved in these areas of the related laws and authorities. Next
Yeah, it's,
section.
it's just, let me jump in, Kara, just for a second. So this is a critical piece. And this will be something that as we continue to train the grant loan specialists on this is why it's important to get the SHPO and TIPO pieces going, because there are a lot of consultants out there that think that they're quote unquote doing their client a favor by starting the SHPO TIPO process when in fact they cannot. And so it's oftentimes misunderstood by the ownership group that they think, well, what do you mean I've got to do SHPO? We already did that. No. HUD itself has to initiate these. Again, won't be difficult for comprehensive, but it's going to be a little bit interesting for leading edge with the the go-getter owners that are doing that. So we got to be careful with that. Yep.
Yeah, undoubtedly, you will get a Part 50 that the partner has already done the SHPO and TIPO and probably the endangered species consultations. It doesn't matter. You still have to do it, just as a big flag. All right. So like we said, prior to concept call, Part 50 reviews, the partner is going to assign the heroes. If they don't know who the transaction manager or the GLS is already, they're going to assign it to Ladrina. Thank you, Ladrina, for taking over that. And then Ladrina, once a concept call is scheduled and we now know who the TM is, she'll go ahead and assign the Part 50 to that TM. For conversions of mod rehab, SROs, 202 pracs, same thing. It'll go to Donna though, and Donna will assign it out to her team. And I'm assuming for GRP, it'll go to Roger, and Roger will be assigning out.
Right now we'll just leave it as Ladrina. So, but yes, right now
we're gonna leave it with
Ladrina. Yeah, Ladrina right now.
Perfect.
Yep.
All right.
We'll make a change eventually.
Okay. And a copy of the downloaded hero submission is also going to be uploaded to the financing plan or conversion plan, just so you have proof that yes, it was done. Next slide. So, so at concept call, the TM, the GLS, you're going to be doing an initial completeness check. So you want to make sure it's the correct level of review, that there's a phase 1 or in very limited circumstances, a transaction screen, that all the related laws and authorities have been reviewed. If it's a environmental assessment, that the NEPA review has been completed. You want to make sure that asbestos, lead-based paint, radon, noise, vapor studies, acceptable separation, all additional studies have all been uploaded to Heroes and they're included. You also want to make sure if there are any O&M plans, which is operations and maintenance plans for like asbestos, lead-based paint, and radon, you want to make sure that those are all there too. Again, not having those things can be a huge time suck, and you're going to be going back and forth with the partner, and it's just going to eat away at the clock. So it's great to get ahead of that and make sure that everything is there for you to do a quick and hopefully painless Part 50 review. And like we've been saying, at this point, it is so important to get those SHPO and TIPO packages out. A RAD transaction can't receive approval or an RCC without an approved environmental review. So we've had many instances where, SHPO didn't get sent out on time. That has a 30-day clock to it. And, the project is otherwise ready to go to get their RCC and, run to closing. But because SHPO wasn't sent out in time or TIPO wasn't sent out in time, we're now sitting for 30 days. So just something to be really cognizant of as you're going through these.
And then just a second, Kara, that 30 days is no joke, right? I mean, that's not one where somebody can go, oh, well, can't be, please, Mother May. That is no joke. Those 30 days, that's actually the real deal, and it's not going to get waived for anybody. So we got to make mistakes of that.
All right. So when you log into
Kara,
Heroes,
just a second. Kara, just a second.
Yeah.
Roger had something.
Just to clarify.
Sure.
On the 30-day clock, and then they come back and say, well, we need some additional time for example, MOA. We go as an MOA, I need additional time because the 30-day clock starts.
No. So it's 30 days for the SHPO, TIPO to respond. Actually, TIPO doesn't have to. I don't think they even have to respond. They get longer, but SHPO, once they respond and you're engaging with them, it ends when they say it ends. So the good news about that, Roger, is if you have one that engages early, and we've seen this a couple of times, they can let it go early. But if they engage early and if they want more stuff, it can actually go longer, right? Because likely that when they engage with you, they want more information.
Right.
So they get it, you respond, they respond, you respond, and it takes 45 days instead of 30 days. So if SHPO engages with you, that can be a good thing, but it's often more likely a bad thing. Okay. Thanks, Kara.
It's a complicated thing.
It's a complicated thing. There you go.
Yes. All right, heroes. And I just want to check, are we going to 4 or
We are.
4:10 for the full hour?
We're actually going whatever it takes, a whole hour. We're finishing the slides.
Okay. All right.
You have a
Using heroes. I will go fast.
You have a captive audience, Kara. So, and they've been waiting for
Wonderful.
this. So we can't possibly end early.
All right. So when you finally log into Heroes, this is what your dashboard is going to look like. You will eventually have a whole queue of projects, on your dashboard, but this is a fresh one. And it just sort of shows, you'll be able to search on Heroes by the name of the project, the city, all of that stuff. And this is how you'll access all of your projects when they submit their Part 50 reviews. The next slide. All right. So like Ladrina had talked about earlier, it's going to immediately ask you what kind of review type. And for Heroes, we're going to be doing Part 50s. And so you'll immediately see that selected. And then you're going to come to the initial screen. And this screen is, again, just a bunch of questions. It's all going to be mostly filled out by your partner, environmental partner, but you're going to have the project name. It's going to say what the PIC number is. It's going to say the rental assistance demonstration program. If it's FHA, it'll say FHA and RAD. If it's GRRP, it'll say GRRP. So your program should be identified in that dropdown. It's going to ask, you're most likely going to have to fill in these next 2 stars, the HUD funded amount, as well as the total project cost. That'll usually be blank. And then the rest of the questions are pretty easy for the consultant to answer. So this should be no biggie there.
So Kara, in the case of FHA and GRRP, for example, would I see 2 line items there?
I think so.
Yep, I do too. So, yep.
Think you will. And so further down on that screen, it'll identify all the parties. So the applicant and grant recipient, that's going to be the PHA or the owner. That'll be their information, their point of contact. The HUD preparer will initially be Ladrina or Donna. Eventually, when it gets assigned to the TM or the GLS, you'll go in and you'll put your name in instead. The consultant information is the partner information. So that'll be the environmental provider who's completing this. Next screen. So here's just a little more detail on this. I don't think we need to spend a ton of time on it. I think as you guys look through this, it'll be good to go back, but it just sort of goes through what you're going to want to see in each of those line items and what you're going to see from the partner. Nothing different from what we just reviewed. Next step.
So Kara, on this though,
yeah.
just a quick question. So on these funding amounts, we're generally putting what the ballpark of the amounts could be, because we may or may not know it precisely at the time. So
totally.
What happens when it comes back and it's quote unquote different? So if I put in that the project cost was going to be $20 million and it comes back and it's 15, is that a big deal? Or if it's 30, is that a big deal? What happens if I have some variance there?
I think the variance is fine. You can always change that screen. It's not locked. So, if you're still working on this and this totally got changed or whatever, you can always go in and change it. The important thing, it's not as important on this screen, where identifying the funding and a general amount of the funds is more important on the next screen, which is the project description, which is here. So, I wouldn't get too hung up on those 2 questions, and I would definitely spend more time here. So the project summary, the description of the proposed project, is really important. And it basically needs to encapsulate everything that is happening at this project. So it's not just, project A, we're doing a rehab. they're getting rad. It's going to be nice. I mean, it is going to have, it goes into a lot of detail. When was it built? Where was it built? They want to know what kind of federal action. So for here, it'd be RAD or GRRP, right? As Roger was saying earlier, you want to make sure that GRRP is clearly identified in here, along with the amount of GRRP, if known, should be put in there. Number of units, physical description, the size of the project, and what has come into play recently, all the funding sources that is known at that time. Because if later on, and I think we've seen this with GRRP, what Roger was saying, if GRRP is added later, but it's not in the project description, that technically may require a new environmental review, which we don't want. We want to make sure that everything is in this description. So if anything is added, we don't care if it's taken away, it doesn't matter. Mostly if anything is ever added, we want to make sure that it's all in here. If you're doing a multi-phase project, so you've got a project that has parcel 1, 2, and 3 that'll be done over the next 3 years, you want to make sure that you can get an environmental review on the whole project. So parcels 1, 2, and 3, because this way you don't have to do an environmental review again on parcels 2 and parcel 3. So you want this to be like really detailed, and the consultants aren't going to do that. So it's up to you to make sure that you review it and you add what you think needs to be added to make it as complete as possible. Project location. Yes.
Carrie, second.
Carol, what is the reference material that the partner is using to tell them all these check marks need to be included?
It depends. It depends on who the partner is. I mean, if you have some of the bigger firms, they're going to know this just from experience in working with HUD. If you're using a smaller firm, they're probably not going to know this, and it's going to be a really general project description. But you know, HUD has given many external trainings to environmental providers over the years. So it should be known. But again, you may just get not a great preparer and a great partner. You never know. So it's always good to just go through it and read it and make sure that you as the HUD preparer feel that it is complete. Does that help?
It does. Just a second, because Carly has one too.
Yeah, and kind of
Yeah.
going off of that, so let's say you do get a project summary from the preparer that's not very comprehensive, and you feel like a lot of information is missing. We as the TM, we should be editing that.
Yes.
Right? Okay.
100%.
Yeah.
It's not
Totally.
like this has to be what the preparer says, and
So you need to look at heroes this way, and Kara, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's the starting point for you, right?
Right.
The good news is you've got somebody who's done most, quote unquote, most of the work, but you can't assume it's correct. And your job is to
Correct,
go through and make sure that it makes sense to you, right? It's not like you're going to send it back to them
Yeah.
for, you know, these sorts of changes. You can make those changes. There are places where you might need to send it back if you need further studies or something like that. But for this, the site description, you should know it.
Yeah.
And you should know it well enough to know that what they wrote is either adequate or not. If not, make it adequate. Yeah.
So usually you'll, okay, so usually you'll just have one Part 50 that you need to review. But there are times when you'll have a scattered site. I could be wrong. I don't think this is going to apply to GRRP as much as it does with RAD, but there's a chance that you may have, you know, in Philadelphia, you may have, you know, 16 different townhomes that are on all different blocks. And the PHA wants to submit one Part 50. We can't accept that because they're not contiguous. So they're all going to have different environmental factors. So you're going to have whatever, 16 individual Part 50 reviews that you're going to have to do. And I think we've had some TMs who have had to do that, Ottawa being one of them, who had a very painful experience with doing many, many, many environmental reviews because the project was scattered sites and not contiguous. And like I said earlier, if the rad conversion is part of a multi-phase, as much as possible, if we can get all the phases in under one Part 50, it makes everybody's life moving forward easier. All right. So what are these related laws and authorities? All right. So there are 16 of them. And when you go into the map guide and you look at the map guide, they're all broken out by related law and authority. And they range from historic properties, floodplains, to wetlands, to explosives. It gets very exciting. My biggest recommendation is to get very familiar with the HUD Exchange website and the environmental review program within HUD Exchange. They do an amazing job of breaking all of these down for you. There's also what they call Wiser, a web-based instructional system for environmental reviews, which are mini training sessions, like deep dives for each and every one of these related laws and authorities. So as you have time, I really recommend you doing that. There are also, oh, you can go to the next one. There's also some additional requirements. So I was just saying that I very much recommend you getting familiar with the HUD Exchange website for the environmental reviews. It's a great website on HUD Exchange. The link is here, and it goes through each and every one of these in detail for you. As well as it has these Wiser modules, which are basically these little mini deep dives into every single related law and authority, and it even has a little quiz at the end. And so as you have time, I totally recommend doing both of those things and getting familiar with them. Next slide. All right, so the map guide has additional requirements within the related laws and authorities. So it will also require lead-based paint, asbestos, radon, and towers. And those are all grouped together in what's called housing requirements in the related laws and authorities. And then in some cases, there will be additional requirements for contamination, floodplain, and explosives and flammable hazards. All of these are laid out in detail in the map guide as well. So that is a great reference for you to also get really familiar with. So when you get to the actual Part 50 review for the related laws and authorities, this is what the screen is going to look like. It'll be much longer. You'll have many more of those little boxes, but all of the related laws and authorities are going to be listed out. And it's what Robert was just saying, although you will have narratives there, and you will have items uploaded within each and every one of those related laws and authorities, like the TM and the GLS, you're not off the hook. You still have to make sure that they uploaded the right stuff. They uploaded reports and maps and letters to support what they're saying. And you also want to make sure that if there is mitigation, that it is properly getting flagged. So there are many times where they've answered questions wrong within each of the related laws and authorities, which can lead to a different determination. And so those are the kinds of things that as a TM and a GLS, you are going to be spot checking. All right. And when you open up each related law and authority, so here is a screenshot of when you open up airport hazards, there is also a direct link to the HUD Exchange website that I was just referencing below. So you can click on that and it'll bring you to the lower screenshot on HUD Exchange. And like I said, it gives you full detail on what you're looking for compliance and documentation. So you never have to be like, is this enough? Is this not enough? It's all laid out for you within HUD Exchange to always use, to make sure that you're getting what you need. So I don't want to spend too much time on this because I think we're going to do a deeper dive into all of these at a later time, but there are different mapping systems that are available to TMs and grant loan specialists that help you confirm information or provide additional information to each of the Part 50 reviews. So there's a NEPA Assist, which is specially designed for these reviews. You can use the FEMA flood map. You sometimes have to get a little into the Google weeds and find, state level maps for coastal zone management, but there's always a way to find what you need to find. Next slide. So yeah, so this just goes over all of them. And this is also included in the HUD Exchange. It also gives you all of these links as well for your use.
I would say that of that list, that NEPA Assist is probably one of the best ones.
The
Don't you
best,
think?
yeah.
Yeah.
For sure, yeah. All right, environmental assessments. So environmental assessments, when you open up Heroes, you're going to see another section that you won't see in assessed review. And these are all really looking at sort of the community space. So it's really trying to go a little deeper to see how this project affects the broader community through I think there's like 4 or 5 different sections. So you can go to the next screen. I think I have that there. Yep. So it's going to ask very specific questions on land development, socioeconomic, community facilities, natural features, and climate and energy, which is the biggie, which I think, everybody's paying a lot of attention to, obviously. The questions and answers are really nuanced. And so if you get an EA that doesn't have any of this filled out, that's a reason to kick it back to the partner. They need to fill all of this out. We can review it and evaluate it, but the level of detail that's required for an EA is we don't have that as HUD employees. So that is a reason to kick back a Part 50 for sure. So that is pretty much it on that part. And then I think I'm going to run through mitigation factors real quick. And then we can get to some of the quirks. So just like William was talking about in the last section about those special conditions and additional provisions, how you have to be like really clear and have it make sense. It's the same thing with mitigation measures in Heroes. You want to make sure that whatever mitigation requirement is needed is clear and actionable. And the mitigation measures are determined through the set of intuitive questions within each related law and authority. So it helps you figure out if, yes, we need mitigation here or not. Next slide. So these are just some examples of what an acceptable mitigation measure is. You want it to be clearly written and actionable. They're going to become part of the RCC special condition or additional provision. So you'll notice we've got a ton of environmental special and additional provisions in the RCCs already. They come directly from Heroes language. So you don't need to make up a lot of these. But you want to make sure that they're all flowing through. And then just of a note, mitigation measure versus mitigation plan. The measure is, what's going to be done to reduce the environmental risk. And the plan is more detailed in who's doing it and when are they doing it. Next slide. And then finally, mitigation follow-up. But I think we'll tag this one, Robert, onto the future training because we do need to clear those out.
Agreed.
Ladrina.
All right, thank you, Kara. Amazing work as usual. We are going to wrap this up with quirks that we've seen while doing these reviews, starting with funding from other HUD programs. As we mentioned before, especially for the GLS, we see a lot of FHA insured funding along with the GRRP funding. Well, what happens when we get something like home funds or CDBG funds, something related to non-RAD PVVs that will trigger Part 58. Under HUD regulations, a single project associated with both a Part 50 program and a Part 58 technically are required to have 2 separate environmental reviews. But under Part 58, HUD can make that determination where we'll just report or perform one Part 50 review to encompass both programs. Now, both programs have to agree on doing it together. So if this is, RAD combined with CDBG, we would have to make sure that CPD is agreeable to, have a joint Part 50 done. In that situation, we just ensure that the Part 50 considers the full scope of all activities associated with both funding programs, okay? And this can require reevaluating a Part 50 review if it's already been done. So at the bottom, there's this cool little chart that kind of tells you the flow of how we would proceed with that, which is just the RAD approving official certifying first. We assign the environmental review record to, the next office. The next office is approving official. Then they'll certify in HEROES and upload a certification to that HEROES entry saying, like we co-sign on this, this Part 50.
Yeah, Ladrina, this is Robert. So this may happen with GRP transactions. So there may be additional funding that comes in that requires another HUD office to also approve on top of what the grant loan specialists are doing. So this needs to be followed in all cases, RAD and GRP.
Yeah,
Okay.
so that flow chart is definitely something to keep in mind when you ever having a doubt of, where does it go next? Okay, another perk. So RAD and Radon. Back in 2019, the RAD notice, Rev 4 actually introduced RAD Radon requirements. It didn't make it, I guess, mandatory at the time. And then 2020's MAP Guide update said, hey, let's do, radon, but here are the exceptions to the folks that don't, that don't have to do it. And then 2022 came around with the RAD supplemental notice and said, hey, everyone needs to do a radon report. So that's where we are now. Radon should be evaluated for all projects, as we mentioned in previous slide.
And GRP.
And
So
GRP.
Radon is radon. Radon is important across the board.
Absolutely. And then this is just a chart just highlighting what I just said, right? Like these conversion types, whether it's Part 58 or Part 50, all levels, scope of work, for the scope of work, the awardee must submit a radon report consistent with the requirements of the MAP Guide. Then the Part 50 FHA, they have to follow the multifamily production guidance pursuant to the MAP Guide. And here's a handy dandy chart to tell you, depending on the level of work being done, when radon testing is required and when when mitigation is required. So you see the 3 different levels of maintenance only versus rehab versus new construction. Follow the flow chart down to see if, when radon testing is required. And you'll notice that post-construction testing is required for the new construction projects or projects that, qualify as new construction. And then ultimately, if those results are greater than 4.0 picocuries per liter, you are required to do mitigation and post-mitigation testing is required, as well as the completion certification and an O&M plan. All right. Another quirk. Okay, so transfers of assistance, CATs, which are converting awaiting transfers, as well as early demolition. Back in the day, our office would only complete environmental reviews for the sites that were receiving assistance or that we were transferring it to. So there was no ER completed on the originating site prior to the conversion and the removal of the declaration of trust. So legal or OGC said, hey, by not completing the review on the originating site, to the DOT release, it will create an adverse action, right? So to resolve this, we are required to complete a Part 58 ER on the originating site prior to the concept call. So we talked about earlier about, PHA developing a reasonable project description in their reviews. So what we want to do is make sure we include, any potential future action on that site, even if they don't know for sure what's going to happen, just throw it in there. Okay, you can throw in, we could sell the land, we could demo or rebuild, put all possibilities in the project description, okay? The TM will select there's a new RCC TOA additional provision that will affirm that the Part 58 was completed on the originating site. And then at closing, the declaration of trust is released on the originating site, and a TOA alternative restrictive covenant is placed on the land, and that's with any modifications arising from any historic preservation review. And a covenant or easement is recorded if required by SHPO on the receiving site. And then because we all love pictures, here's what we just said in a graphic form. So you see the public housing originating site. And then at the top, you see the Part 58 prior to concept call, the transfer of assistance to this brand new construction. And you see that a Part 50 or 58 will be needed for the financing plan for that receiving site. Okay. Lead-based, oh, that's Kara. All right.
We're in the last like 3 slides, I swear. Okay. So lead-based guidance. This isn't so much a quirk as just a heads up that because providers and partners and PHAs continually get this all tripped up, that at the time of a Part 50 submission, if required, a lead-based paint report needs to be uploaded into Heroes. That is required in order to get environmental review approval and get your RCC. The lead-based paint O&M, that can be conditioned, and we have those conditions written out. That's fine. But we need the lead-based paint report if it meets any of these sort of requirements based on when the year it was constructed and what kind of rehab is being done. There also may be abatement that's required, and that will go in as an additional provision, also already pre-written for you guys, and that'll get cleared out when they come back for their completion cert. Next slide. Same thing for asbestos. We want to make sure that, again, we have the asbestos report if it meets any of the year construction requirements and the level of scope of work. We need that report in order for environmental review approval. The O&M, again, can be conditioned, totally fine. And any abatement will have to be an additional provision and cleared out by the time the completion cert is reviewed and approved by the closing team. Next slide. Oh, flood resiliency. So this is a new one in the RAD supplemental notice, where RAD is often in a unique position where we can get ahead of policy and regulation changes that are happening and are on the slow train. And so we decided to take the opportunity within the supplemental notice, and I believe GRRP is worded the same way on flood resiliency. And so it's requiring, until the new regulation comes out, which it looks like it's having momentum, we are going to follow this for all of our RAD and GRRP projects. And so it's really saying that any project that is within the 500-year floodplain, we're going to have additional flood requirements to help mitigate any future flood disasters. So mechanicals and residential units have to be designed at either the 500-year floodplain or 2 feet above the 100-year floodplain. Any interior non-residential spaces at a minimum must be flood-proofed to at least 2 feet above the 100-year floodplain. And for buildings outside of the FEMA floodplains, we're always encouraging our owners or awardees to do what they can do to help prevent future flooding. We know it's just going to get worse. And so, we are always going to encourage owners to take a look and see if they can actually do anything. All of this information is submitted under a separate cover, and it's a part of the rad conversions financing plan or conversion plan. And then the TM will take that and upload it to Heroes and make it a part of the environmental review record. Flood stuff is really confusing and really tricky. And so if this does pop up on any of your projects, I really recommend reaching out to Ladrina, myself, John, Robert, whoever. And we oftentimes pull in the field environmental officers just because they have a much better handle on what's happening on the ground in their localities. Because it's not very straightforward. And so TM resources. Here is everything with direct links to different areas that we really, really encourage you guys on, whenever you have time to sort of read up on, have handy, get comfortable looking through and navigating through. We're revamping the recap SharePoint site, and a bunch of us did a multi-day, very deep dive training last year. And ideally, I'd love to get my hands on those slides and move them to the SharePoint so we can share them with everybody and everybody would have access to them. So that's coming. But that's it. That's
Thank you,
it.
Kara.
Great.
Thank you, Ladrina. Good
Thank
job.
you.
No, very good,
Thanks,
very good.
Ladrina. Thanks, Robert.
Appreciate you guys.
Couple of things I
Yes,
do want
thanks.
to, thanks, Kara. No, a couple of
Mhm.
things I do want to stress, is that particularly for the grant loan specialist, there will be more training on this. This was just a teaser, if you will, just to kind of get you familiar with what's going on, what's to come. I mentioned it earlier to respond that Kara had about getting access. So this all in process. Roger, you do anything more about?
We've requested, access for Heroes, that should get an email from Heroes team shortly.
Good, perfect. And then once we get to the point where we've got some Heroes entries we can assign to you all, we will do that, and then we'll do a training so that we can all sit down and kind of start going through them together. But I would also say Ladrina and Kara, fabulous. They're the ones to reach out to. They know this stuff really, really well. And it's fine if you want to send John or I a note, but more than likely we're going to go to them. So they're great and they're accessible for you guys. That's it for today.